Victor Barnes hadn't expected his Saturday morning to begin with a chainsaw and a crying 6-year-old clinging to his leg. "Daddy, are you going to cut the whole tree down?" Olivia asked, clutching her stuffed fox tighter against her chest as she stared at the massive oak stretched across the neighbor's driveway. Victor sighed, wiping sweat off his brow with the back of his hand. "Only the part that's blocking the fancy lady's car, baby. She might need to get out." The fancy lady hadn't come out yet. Not that Victor cared. He wasn't expecting a thank you. He wasn't even supposed to be here. The tree had fallen during last night's storm, and this wasn't his house. He lived 2 streets over, in a rental with a leaky roof and a kitchen faucet that coughed more than it poured. But when Olivia had pointed out the fallen tree while they biked past on their morning ride, he couldn't just ignore it. So now he stood there in a worn gray t-shirt, jeans stained with grease and grass, and an old chainsaw buzzing in his hands, ready to clear the way for someone too rich to be up before noon. The front door swung open just as he fired up the chainsaw again. "Wait," a voice called out. Victor looked up, and for a second, he thought he might have lost his mind. The woman standing on the porch looked like she belonged in some kind of magazine ad for designer perfume. Long honey-brown hair spilled over her shoulders, and she wore a silk robe that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe. But her expression wasn't annoyed or entitled, it was confused, and then curious. "Oh," she said, stepping barefoot onto the porch. "I didn't call anyone." Victor let the saw idle and waved awkwardly. "You didn't. Tree was blocking your driveway. Figured I'd take care of it before you needed to leave." Her eyes flicked to Olivia, who was now sitting on the grass, humming to her fox. "I'm sorry, Who are you?" "I live a couple blocks over," Victor said. "Victor Barnes, that's my daughter, Olivia." She blinked, then smiled. "I'm Brielle Westwood." Of course she was. The name clicked immediately. Westwood Investments, Westwood Hotels, Westwood freaking Tower downtown. Victor tried not to react. He wasn't sure how he'd missed it. Maybe because she wasn't in heels and a power suit, just barefoot and blinking at him like she couldn't believe someone had shown up to help without being paid. "Well, Brielle," he said, gripping the saw again, "unless you like being boxed in, I'm gonna get started. Shouldn't take long." She hesitated, then nodded. "Wait, let me make you coffee or something." He shook his head. "I'm good." But 5 minutes later, while chunks of wood flew and sweat rolled down his back, she appeared again. This time in jeans and a soft sweater, holding 2 mugs. "Even superheroes need coffee," she said, handing one to him. Victor chuckled. "I'm no superhero." Brielle tilted her head. "You're out here breaking your back for someone you don't know. That counts." They stood in silence for a moment, the chainsaw quiet between them. Olivia ran up and tugged on Victor's shirt. "Daddy, Miss Brielle has a pool. I saw it through the fence." Brielle laughed. "She's right." "Wanna come see it?" Victor opened his mouth to object, but Olivia was already skipping toward the gate. "I'll keep an eye on her," Brielle said quickly. "Promise." He nodded cautiously, watching as Brielle led his daughter to the backyard. He finished cutting the last thick branch, then started clearing the debris into a pile. He barely noticed the time pass until Brielle returned, holding Olivia's hand and smiling like they'd been best friends for years. "She's a great kid," Brielle said softly. "She's my whole world," Victor replied, tossing the last branch aside. Brielle looked at him differently after that. Not like he was some guy with a chainsaw, not like he was out of place, but like she saw him. "I want to thank you properly," she said. "Dinner tonight, my treat." Victor blinked. I'm not asking for a date," she added quickly. "I'm saying thank you, that's all. Bring Olivia. I'll make something simple." Victor hesitated, glancing down at his daughter, who was now spinning in slow circles on the grass, arms out like airplane wings. "All right," he said finally, "but only if you let me bring dessert." That night, Victor stood in front of Brielle's house again. Olivia wore her best dress, one with tiny sunflowers, and held a plate with brownies they'd baked together. Victor had on the only button-down shirt he owned. Brielle opened the door with a grin. "You clean up pretty well, chainsaw man. And you're not bad yourself, pool lady," he shot back. The dinner wasn't fancy, but it was warm. Homemade pasta, salad, laughter, and the sound of Olivia giggling while Brielle showed her how to fold napkins into swans. Victor couldn't stop watching Brielle how she talked with her hands, how she listened when Olivia told her about her favorite bedtime story, how she looked at him like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. Later that night, as they stood by the door, Brielle looked up at Victor. "Thanks again, for earlier you didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." Brielle hesitated. "Most people assume I have a staff for things like that." Victor shrugged. "I don't really care what most people think," she smiled, something soft flickering in her eyes. "Good." Victor walked home that night with Olivia's hand in his and a strange feeling settling in his chest. Like something had just started, and he wasn't sure where it was going, but he knew one thing for sure: he liked it already. Victor didn't expect to see Brielle again so soon. But 3 days later, she showed up at his auto repair shop. It wasn't the shiny black SUV that caught his attention, it was the woman stepping out of it in navy slacks and a crisp blouse, looking like she'd stepped out of some high-level boardroom into his grease-streaked world. She glanced around, clearly out of place among the scent of oil and the whirring tools, but her gaze landed on Victor with the same certainty as before. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked toward her, puzzled. "Didn't think I'd see you in this part of town." "I needed new brakes," she said, holding up a set of keys, "and I figured I'd trust the guy who takes down trees for strangers." He raised an eyebrow. "You could have gone anywhere." "There's a dealership less than a mile from your place." "I know," she replied, surveying the open garage, "but I wanted someone honest, and I hear you run this shop yourself." Victor took the keys, still watching her. "You asking for a discount, Westwood?" she laughed, and it was a lighter sound than he expected. "If I were, I'd be wearing heels." He chuckled quietly and motioned toward the waiting area inside. "It's gonna take a few hours." "You're welcome to sit inside, but I warn you, the coffee's questionable." She followed him, her heels clicking against the concrete despite the jeans she'd swapped into. The contrast between her and the lobby's worn couch and stack of outdated magazines was jarring, but she didn't seem to mind. She took a seat and crossed her legs, eyeing him with a level of interest that made his skin prickle. "So," she said as he grabbed the paperwork, "how long have you been running this place?" Victor hesitated, then sat across from her. "I took over 5 years ago. It was my uncle's before that." "He passed, and I didn't want the place going under." She nodded slowly. "You do everything yourself?" "Mostly. Hired a couple of kids from the tech school nearby. They're still learning, but they hustle." There was a pause, then she asked, "Is that why you picked up the chainsaw?" "Because you're used to fixing things." Victor leaned back slightly. "No, I just don't like watching people struggle when I can help." That quieted her for a moment, then she looked at him differently, not like she had at dinner. There was something more piercing in her gaze now, as if she were trying to decode him without asking too much, too fast. "I'm guessing this place keeps you busy." He tapped the clipboard on his knee. "It does. But it also lets me be home in time to make dinner and help with homework." "You don't have anyone else to help," he shook his head. "It's just me and Olivia." Her eyes softened a fraction. "That kind of responsibility changes a person." "It does. Makes you realize what matters fast." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced around the room, her fingers trailing along the armrest of the chair. "You know, I didn't always live in that house," she said after a beat. "Truth is, I bought it on impulse after my father passed. I thought it would feel like a fresh start." Victor tilted his head. "Did it?" She gave a small, dry laugh. "Not really. Turns out, grief isn't something you can outspend." He looked at her, really looked. The polish, the confidence, it was all real, but underneath it, she wore something heavier. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She nodded once. "Thanks." They sat in silence, the buzz of the garage filling the space between them. Then she stood, brushing invisible lint from her pants. "I'll come back later to pick it up. Let me know how much." Victor rose too. "It won't be much. Just brake pads and a little labor." She paused halfway to the door. "Victor?" "Yeah, I meant what I said the other night. Olivia's a good kid. You're doing something right." He watched her leave, the bell over the door chiming behind her. That evening, after the shop closed and Olivia was in bed, Victor sat at the small kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a stack of bills. His phone buzzed, and he checked it out of habit, but there were no new messages. Not that he expected any. Still, something about Brielle lingered at the edge of his thoughts. The way she'd sat in that cracked vinyl chair like it was a throne. The quiet way she'd mentioned her father. The fact that she could afford to go anywhere but she'd come to him. He didn't know what she wanted. But for the first time in a long while, he found himself wanting to find out. The next morning, the SUV was still in the lot, and taped to the driver's side window was a note scrawled in quick, slanted handwriting. "Don't fix it if you don't have time. I'd rather come back and see you again anyway." Victor stared at the note for a long time, the sun rising slowly behind it, and for the first time in months he smiled without thinking. Victor didn't see Brielle for almost a week. She hadn't come back for the SUV. He'd finished the brake job in an hour and parked it in the back, waiting for her to return. But the space remained empty, and with each passing day, he told himself not to care. He had more than enough on his plate: 2 cars with engine trouble, a supplier who'd shorted him on parts, and Olivia's school asking for volunteers for the spring fair. He had no time for wondering why a woman like Brielle Westwood would bother with someone like him. So when she finally did return 5 days later, unannounced and carrying a paper bag that smelled like roasted garlic and fresh bread, he didn't know what to say. "I brought dinner," she said, standing in the doorway of the shop with the early evening sun glowing behind her. Victor wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from beneath the lifted hood of a dusty Ford. "You disappeared." "I had to fly to Chicago," she said, walking in. "Board meeting. I left a message with your receptionist." He raised an eyebrow. "I don't have a receptionist." She gave a small shrug. "Well, then I guess I owe you an apology. You didn't have to bring food. I didn't have to show up the first time either." He didn't have a reply for that. She set the bag down on the small desk near the office, then looked around as though seeing the place differently this time. Her gaze lingered on the cracked linoleum floor, the wall with photos of Olivia's school drawings pinned beside invoices and schedules. "How do you manage all this?" she asked. "The shop, your daughter, everything?" Victor leaned against the workbench. "I don't sleep much," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's not a real answer." "I don't have a real solution," he said. "I just keep going, one thing at a time." There was a pause, and then she said, "Do you ever want more?" He frowned slightly. "More what? More than this?" "The shop, the town, the constant juggling." He looked at her, and something shifted in the air between them. "I used to," he said, "back when I thought life would go the way I planned. And now I focus on what's in front of me. Olivia, the work that keeps us going." "That's enough." Brielle stepped closer, her heels tapping softly against the concrete. "You don't seem like someone who settles." "I'm not," he said, "but I've learned that chasing everything at once just means dropping what matters most." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she opened the paper bag and took out 2 takeout containers, placing them carefully on the desk. "I wasn't sure what you liked," she said, unfolding 2 sets of utensils. "So I guessed." He eyed the food. "You guessed Italian. I overheard you telling one of your mechanics that Olivia loves spaghetti." Victor blinked. "You were listening. I'm invested now," she said simply. "I figured I should do some research." He didn't know what to say to that. So instead, he pulled up a chair and motioned for her to sit. As they ate, something softened between them. The conversation turned lighter stories about Olivia's obsession with dinosaurs, Brielle's disastrous first attempt at cooking lasagna, the time Victor had accidentally locked his keys inside the car while it was still running. When the food was gone and the sky outside had deepened to a soft gray, Brielle leaned back in her chair. "I'm not used to this," she said quietly. "To what?" "To being around someone who sees past the surface, who doesn't care about the money or the headlines." Victor looked at her carefully. "You're not exactly easy to ignore." "I don't mean attention," she said. "I mean being seen for who I am when I'm not performing." He studied her, then asked, "And who is that?" She hesitated. "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out." Victor nodded slowly. "That makes 2 of us." A long silence stretched between them. The hum of the shop's old fridge kicked on in the background. Then Brielle asked, "Can I show you something?" Victor raised an eyebrow. Now she stood, reaching into her bag and pulling out a slim envelope. She handed it to him without a word. He opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation-heavy cardstock, gold-embossed lettering. "Westwood Foundation Gala," he read aloud. "It's this Saturday," she said. "I'm hosting." He he looked up. Why are you giving this to me? Because I want you to come. I don't own a tux. I'll take care of that. I can't leave Olivia. You won't have to. It's at the hotel downtown. I'll have a room arranged, one for her with a sitter, one for you to get ready. Everything covered. Victor stared at her. You planned all that. I hoped for it, she said softly. You made me feel like myself again. I want you there. He studied her carefully, his heart thudding louder than he was comfortable with. She wasn't just asking him to attend a fancy event. She was pulling him into her world, one that didn't have space for hesitation or halfway feelings. I'll think about it, he said finally. Brielle nodded. That's all I ask. She left not long after, with the same quiet grace she always carried. And when Victor closed the shop that night, the envelope still sat in his hand. He didn't know what the right choice was, but he knew this. Brielle Westwood wasn't just passing through, and whatever came next, he couldn't ignore it anymore. Victor adjusted the collar of the tuxedo he had no business wearing and stared at his reflection in the gilded mirror of the Westwood Grand Hotel suite. He barely recognized the man looking back at him, clean-shaven, pressed shirt, shoes polished to a mirror sheen. Olivia was in the adjoining room with a Westwood-approved sitter, happily sipping juice and watching a movie. He checked twice to make sure she was content before stepping into the empty silence of his own suite. He wasn't used to silence. His life was grease-stained and noisy, predictable in its chaos. But this was another world altogether. A knock came at the door, sharp and deliberate. Victor opened it to find a sharply dressed man holding a slim black case. Miss Westwood asked that this be delivered to you personally, the man said, offering the case before turning and disappearing down the hall. Inside was a watch. Sleek, heavy, impossibly expensive. He didn't need to know the brand to understand what it cost. Beneath it, a folded note on thick cream paper. Wear it. You're not out of place. You never were. Her handwriting was just like her, elegant, certain, with an edge of warmth. Victor fastened the watch around his wrist. It felt foreign, but he didn't take it off. Downstairs, the ballroom shimmered with glass and gold. Waiters moved like choreography between glittering guests. Everything gleamed: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, laughter that echoed just a little too perfectly. He spotted her before she saw him. Brielle stood near the edge of the crowd, speaking with a gray-haired man in a navy tuxedo and a woman in silver. Her hair was swept up, and her gown was midnight blue, fitted and flawless. But it wasn't the dress or the crowd that made his chest tighten. It was the way she stood, poised, unshakable, but scanning the room like she was looking for something real in a sea of curated perfection. When she saw him, the edges of her mouth lifted, but not in a way that performed. It was private, meant only for him. You clean up well, she said as he reached her. You didn't mention there'd be 1,000 people in tuxedos, he replied, voice low. She leaned in just slightly. They aren't who I'm here for. She took his arm not as someone flaunting a guest, but as someone choosing to anchor themselves to something solid. She led him through the crowd, introducing him only to those who mattered, skipping the ones who wouldn't see beyond his jacket. Her hand stayed on his arm longer than necessary. He didn't pull away. Near the end of the night, after speeches and champagne, they stood on the balcony alone. The city sprawled below them, lights like stars scattered across pavement. You didn't have to come, she said, voice softer now. I almost didn't, he admitted. What changed your mind? I wanted to understand what world you came from, and I wanted you to see I wasn't afraid of it. Brielle stepped closer, the wind catching a loose strand of hair at her temple. I've spent years surrounded by people who want something from me, but you just showed up with a chainsaw and a little girl who told me my pool was magic. Victor laughed under his breath. She still thinks it's magic. I think she's right. The silence stretched, comfortable now. I grew up with nothing but expectations, she continued. I was supposed to run the company, carry the name, host events like this, and make it all look easy. But when you cut that tree down and I saw your daughter lying in the grass like she hadn't a care in the world, I realized I'd never felt that kind of peace. He looked at her then, really looked. You could have anything, Brielle, anyone. And yet, she said, stepping close enough that he felt her breath, the only thing I've wanted since that morning is to be invited into that kind of life. The real kind. With burnt brownies and school fairs and a man who shows up, even when it's inconvenient. He didn't kiss her. Not yet, he only said, then come to the fair tomorrow. Olivia's helping run the balloon booth. It'll be chaos. Her eyes lit with something he hadn't seen before. I'd love that. They left together, her heels in hand, their laughter quiet as they walked through the now empty lobby. He walked her to her suite but didn't follow her in. He didn't need to. The next afternoon, Brielle showed up at the fair wearing jeans, sunglasses, and a t-shirt that said Team Olivia in glitter paint. She handed out balloon strings, got her hands sticky with cotton candy, and cheered when Olivia won third place in the art contest. Later, Olivia tugged at Victor's hand and whispered, "Can Miss Brielle come over for dinner? I want her to see our kitchen." Victor met Brielle's eyes across the booth. She nodded before he could ask. That night, she sat at their kitchen table, folding paper napkins with Olivia, laughing over a crooked lasagna that refused to cook evenly in their sputtering oven. No catered meals, no polished silver, just warmth, just home. When Victor walked her out to her car, she turned to him, her expression unguarded. "I want this," she said. "More than I've ever wanted anything. The dinners, the mess, the mornings with cereal and bad coffee." He hesitated, then stepped forward. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." So he kissed her, and it wasn't dramatic or choreographed. It was quiet, steady, the kind of kiss that said, "I see you, I'm not going anywhere." Months later, Olivia stood barefoot in the backyard, twirling in a dress she'd picked herself, while Victor lit candles on the patio table he'd built from scratch. Brielle stepped out with wine in one hand and a bowl of chips in the other, laughing when the dog knocked over a chair. Victor caught her around the waist, kissed her temple, and whispered, "You still think the pool is magic?" She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I think everything is when I'm with you." The first time Brielle brought Victor to her office, he stood in the middle of the glass-walled corner suite like he wasn't sure whether to sit, touch anything, or just turn around and walk back out. The view stretched across half the city, high above the noise and traffic, but Victor didn't look at it. His eyes were on the framed photographs along her bookshelf, corporate galas, ribbon cuttings, a younger Brielle standing beside a man with the same sharp jawline and unrelenting posture. "That's your father," he said. She nodded, crossing the room to stand beside him. "He built this company from a two-person firm in a basement office. He used to say, 'Don't ever let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness. But don't let success harden you either.'" Victor glanced sideways at her. "You think he'd approve of me?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the photo again, then back at him. "He'd want me to be with someone who makes me better, who challenges me. Someone who'd never care about my last name, that's you." Victor let out a low breath. "I keep expecting the other shoe to drop, like someone's going to walk in and tell me I don't belong here." "They can try," she said, "but they'd have to get through me first." He nodded slowly but didn't speak. His hand brushed along the edge of her desk, touching nothing, leaving no trace. She turned to him fully. "I didn't bring you here to prove anything, Victor. I brought you because I'm including you. This is my world. I want to share it." He turned then, really turned to her, and something eased in his shoulders. "Then let me share mine too." 3 weeks later, she did just that. She came to the spring fundraiser at Olivia's school wearing a borrowed apron and helped run the bake sale table without flinching when a child smeared chocolate frosting on her sleeve. She spilled lemonade on her shoes, helped hang decorations in the gym, and stayed long after cleanup to stack chairs beside Victor. Afterward, they sat on the school's back steps, the night warm, faint music from a Bluetooth speaker drifting from a group of kids still playing in the field. "I never thought I'd love this kind of chaos," she said, stretching her legs out in front of her. "But I do." "You sure it's not just the cupcakes?" "I'm sure," she said with a small laugh. "Though I won't pretend those snickerdoodles didn't change my life." Victor leaned back on his elbows beside her. "Kids like you, I noticed. I think they can tell I'm still figuring it out, that I'm not pretending to be perfect." She looked over at him. "They trust honesty. Then you'll do just fine." She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his easily. "Have you ever thought about doing something more with the shop?" He blinked. "Like what?" "Expanding, teaching, partnering with schools." I know you said you hired from the tech program. What if you created something bigger? Victor looked at her, surprise flickering behind his eyes. You think people would go for that? I think there are a lot of kids out there who need someone to believe in them. You're already doing it. You just don't know how big it could get. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'd need help, guidance, maybe even investment. She bumped her knee lightly against his. Well, you know someone with a little experience in that area. He gave her a sideways glance. You'd go into business with me. No, she said. I'd support your business. I don't want to change it. I just want to help you grow it the way you want to. He looked down at their joined hands. I never thought I'd be with someone who could make me feel like I could do more without making me feel like I wasn't already enough. She turned his face gently toward hers. You've always been enough. 2 months later, they stood together at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the new apprenticeship annex built behind the repair shop. Olivia held the scissors with both hands while the small crowd cheered. Victor wore a navy shirt and jeans, his name stitched above the pocket, and Brielle stood proudly beside him in a floral sundress, her arm resting lightly around his waist. She had taken a step back from the Westwood board, handing over more responsibilities to her COO. She still advised, still consulted, but she no longer carried the weight of every decision on her shoulders. Her days were split now between business and life, between city meetings and school pickups, between boardrooms and backyard picnics. One evening, as they sat in the backyard, Olivia asleep upstairs, the last traces of sunlight fading behind the fence, Brielle turned to Victor. I never thought I'd feel peace like this, she said, her head resting on his chest. I spent so long chasing control. And now I think I finally understand that love isn't about control at all. It's about choosing someone again and again, even when it's hard. Victor kissed the top of her head. Then we're doing it right. She looked up at him, eyes soft. Marry me, he blinked. What? You heard me. You're serious. I've never been more serious. He let out a breath and laughed, breathless and stunned, then pulled her into his lap. You beat me to it. You were going to ask. I already bought the ring. She grinned wide, wrapping her arms around his neck. Then you better use it. He did. 6 weeks later, in a garden behind the auto shop, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and a surprisingly enthusiastic group of children holding paper flowers, they stood beneath a wooden arch Victor had built with his own hands. Olivia walked Brielle down the aisle, beaming with pride. The ceremony was simple. Honest. Full of laughter and tears and promises that meant more because they came from people who had already chosen each other every day. As they exchanged vows, Victor whispered, You saved me, Brielle. She shook her head. No, we found each other, and we built this. They kissed as the sun dipped low and the crowd erupted in cheers. Later, as they danced in the glow of string lights, with Olivia twirling barefoot nearby and the scent of grilled corn and freshly baked pie drifting through the air, Brielle looked up at Victor. Still think the fair was chaos, he smiled. Best kind. And in that moment, with music in the air, laughter around them, and love rooted deep in something real, they knew this was their forever. And it was exactly where they were meant to be.